Okay, it's now 4 after the hour. We'll go ahead and get started. I appreciate everybody showing up. I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us today for the release of the 2020 report card for Utah's infrastructure. My name is Darren Burton. I'm the president of the Utah section of the American Society of Civil Engineers, or ASCE. First, I'd like to thank everyone for calling in today. I hope everyone is safe during these difficult times. Although Zoom meetings have become second nature at this stage of COVID-19 pandemic, it is still worth noting that the current climate has changed the way we operate. We appreciate your understanding of holding this event in a virtual setting due to the ongoing health risks associated with in-person gatherings. Usually, we would hold this event in a public location such as the state capitol, but ASCE holds paramount in the public's health, safety, and welfare. Before I pass the baton to Craig Friant, I'd like to take this opportunity to provide some background information on ASCE Utah section and why we're all here. The Utah section is a local chapter of ASCE National, which is the oldest and largest civil engineering society in the nation. Our section was founded in 1916 and has members from all disciplines and all sectors of the civil engineering field. As stewards of our infrastructure, civil engineers are responsible for the planning, design, construction, operation, and maintenance of our vital public works. With that responsibility comes the obligation to periodically assess the state of our infrastructure, report on its condition and performance, and advise on the steps necessary to improve it. Today, we'll be unveiling the preliminary findings from the ASCE report card for Utah's infrastructure. The full report will be available in early January and will be accessible online. Today, we wanted to take you through some of the take-home messaging from the completed grading. A summary brochure has been developed that provides additional explanation on the grading process and takeaways from these efforts. This report is a snapshot tool for residents, municipalities, businesses, and policymakers to reference as they engage in conversations about where we are and where we want to be. We hope that this information provides additional insights and rekindles these conversations. As our state is home to one of the highest rates of population growth in the country, the quality of our infrastructure is essential to continued sustainable growth. We rely on infrastructure to keep us safe from extreme events that are becoming increasingly likely due to more frequent occurrences than we have seen historically. We also know that strong infrastructure is beneficial to the economy by enabling goods to travel over our bridges and highways, allowing employees to reach their offices in a timely and safe manner, and keeping businesses operational through extreme weather or seismic events. This commitment to continuing to develop and maintain functional and resilient infrastructure is the reason why we are here today. I want to thank those of you dialing in today for attending, and especially thank our committee champions who diligently volunteered their time to complete the report card. Next, I'd like to introduce ASCE Utah Section Past President and Report Card Committee Chair, Craig Friant. Craig will also break down the preliminary findings from the report. Craig, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. I hope everyone has had and will continue to have a joyous holiday season despite the challenges that we've been facing here in 2020. While we have all faced our share of hardships this year, it's great that we can come together in a forum such as this to focus on our state's infrastructure as a means of planning for the future and economic recovery. So with that, let's dive into the report. Using a simple A to F school report format, the 2020 report card provides a comprehensive assessment of current infrastructure conditions and needs. The cumulative grade for the 2020 report card for Utah's infrastructure is a C+. A C+ means our infrastructure is in mediocre condition, but there are signs of deterioration in certain areas. This cumulative grade is the same grade that we gave in the 2015 report card for Utah's infrastructure, which demonstrates that the level of investment and oversight has been successful in maintaining a system able to meet current needs. So the 2020 report card for Utah's infrastructure covers 12 categories. These categories include aviation, bridges, canals, dams, drinking water infrastructure, hazardous waste, levees, solid waste, stormwater infrastructure, roads, transit, and wastewater infrastructure. Each category is assessed by a team of civil engineers who assign the grades according to the following 8 criteria: capacity, condition, funding, future need, operation and maintenance, public safety, resilience, and innovation. It is important to say the report card is not meant to be a commentary on, nor an evaluation of, the performance of any particular department or agency. On the contrary, our teams found in most cases our government officials are doing exemplary work with the resources allotted to them. It should also be mentioned that the full effect of the COVID-19 pandemic is not fully understood at this point. The data presented in this report is pre-pandemic. All sectors of infrastructure have been impacted by the pandemic, some more than others. Now, I will highlight some of the top findings and provide additional detail for each of the categories before discussing our section's recommendations for raising the grades in Utah. Utah is home to some of the best performing transportation infrastructure in the nation, which plays a strong role in attracting business opportunities. The appeal that reliable transportation has on businesses is apparent in the recently completed Tech Corridor project, which was built in coordination with innovative freeway-to-freeway ramps alongside I-15. These projects and improvements reduce cost of inefficient transportation and create well-paying jobs. By alleviating congestion, we are also reducing emissions and having a positive impact on air quality, an issue held dear to Utahns. So let's start with bridges, which received a B+ in the report. Over the past 5 years, Utah has seen more than a 40% decrease in structurally deficient bridges, going from 2.9% in 2015 to 1.7% in 2020. That 1.7% is impressive. It's the fourth lowest percentage in the country. Utah has demonstrated national leadership by expanding bridge capacity by 30 to 40 bridges each year to accommodate population growth, and by advancing project schedule and delivery through the use of alternative delivery methods, such as the state's first progressive design build project for improvements to US 89 in Davis County. However, 28% of Utah's current bridges are older than their intended 50-year design life, and that number will rise to 43% in the next 10 years. With reliable funding and good conditions, Utah can be proud of its first-class bridge network. The same can be said for roads, which also received a B+ grade. We have prioritized funding our nearly 50,000 miles of roadways by increasing funding levels from $1.2 billion in 2017 to $1.7 billion in 2020. Utah has also streamlined transportation asset management plans, otherwise known as TAMP, and project risk analysis to preserve roadway infrastructure, increase its adaptability during extreme events, and maintain its functionality after extreme events occur. These steps, collaborative partnerships, and commitment to transportation infrastructure by our state's leadership allow for spending to be done wisely and efficiently. Transit has been another success story which also received a B+. The Utah Transit Authority, or UTA, provides services to nearly 80% of Utah's population through a variety of travel options, including light rail, commuter rail, bus services, and more. Ridership has increased to over 48 million annual riders, up 2 million since our last report card, and our systems have been able to handle the added capacity. However, like most transit systems across the country, Utah's rural areas are lacking in options, and even the urban core saw significant decreases in ridership as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. To a lesser degree, the aviation sector has made improvements as well, earning a C in this report. The grade is held back by a lack of revenue to improve conditions and capacity at smaller airports across the state. Additionally, Salt Lake City International Airport has invested nearly $4 billion in a terminal redevelopment program and recently completed the first phase of its renovations. Since Salt Lake City handles 98% of employments in the state, this investment, when fully realized, will have a dramatic effect on the sector as a whole. Unlike the transportation sector, investment in some segments of water infrastructure is lacking, which is particularly concerning due to the continued aging of our assets. This complicates our ability to provide reliable systems to an increasing volume of residents and prepare to cope with the threat of extreme seismic or weather events. Levees received the lowest grade in the report card with a D-. Between 102 and 112 miles of levees statewide protect over 125,000 Utahns and roughly $10 billion in property. But these pivotal structures have an average age of nearly 60 years and face challenges recognized in changes to federal flood mapping. Very little data is available on the condition of existing levees as well, making it difficult to predict how safe these structures really are. Flooding is a serious problem in Utah, further emphasizing the importance of levees. Public safety information regarding floods in Utah includes 23 recorded injuries and 30 recorded deaths since 2000, with 20 flood-related deaths in 2017 alone. Utah's canals, which received a D+, are aging beyond their intended design life, with many being built over 100 years ago. And these canals are largely self-regulated. Our dams, which received a C+, face an estimated $250 million in investment needs if we want to ensure all high hazard potential dams are up to minimum safety standards. The Utah Division of Water Rights within the Department of Natural Resources has done an excellent job making improvements to existing dams with limited resources. But at the current funding rate, rehabilitation of all high hazard potential dams would take over 60 years. Stormwater infrastructure received a C+, and wastewater infrastructure a C in the report card. The current conditions of both stormwater and wastewater sectors are adequate for the needs of Utahns. Salt Lake City's recent approval for a $350 million EPA loan of the $711 million proposed cost for a new wastewater treatment plant is especially encouraging. This loan demonstrates the effectiveness of the Water Infrastructure Finance and Innovation Act, WIFIA, one of ASCE's national legislative priorities in addressing funding needs for critical water infrastructure. We all know the threat earthquakes place on our infrastructure systems. Salt Lake City is located along the Wasatch Fault Zone with nearly 75% of the state's population residing nearby. While steps have been taken to increase awareness and harden infrastructure against this risk, resilience must continue to be a priority across all infrastructure sectors within the state. This is particularly true for our drinking water infrastructure, which received a B- in this report. Since the 2015 report card, the Utah legislature now requires system asset management plans, or SAMPs, for each water conservancy district in the state. These plans allow water districts and owners to take a proactive approach to planning, operation, and maintenance instead of a reactive approach. Utah developed a 50-year water plan in 2017. This plan includes recommendations for prioritizing sustainable water use, controlling water quality, and maintaining and replacing water infrastructure. We applaud these important steps and look forward to continued implementation of resilient infrastructure strategies, not only for drinking water, but for all infrastructure networks in Utah. Utah still faces challenges, with pipelines having to cross mountainous terrain along the Wasatch Fault to provide service to residents. Drinking water is particularly vulnerable to seismic events. As it stands today, a magnitude 7 earthquake could cripple our drinking water supply system. Utah's hazardous waste and solid waste sectors have so far kept pace with demand, though local recycling markets continue to struggle. Additional investments in circular economy manufacturing initiatives have the potential to divert or reduce tons of material from Utah's hazardous waste stream. That said, hazardous waste generation in Utah has decreased dramatically from over 82,000 tons in 2007 to just under 35,000 tons in 2017, a 58% reduction. While this trend is more illustrative of market forces, reduction in disposal fees could also potentially impact budgets for Department of Environmental Quality programs. The hazardous waste sector received a C+ in the report, primarily for the lack of a firm ban or additional regulations on potentially hazardous e-waste components in municipal solid waste landfills. E-waste includes old laptops, desktops, and other electronics which often contain batteries, plastics, and other materials that pose an environmental threat when subject to improper disposal through incineration or storage in landfills where groundwater may be at risk. While e-waste is not currently regulated as a hazardous waste under the Federal Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, other states have chosen to enact bans on e-waste disposal in landfills or to require manufacturers to implement electronics take-back recycling programs designed to divert e-waste from landfills. In more positive news, remanufacturing and circular economy initiatives, which seek to repurpose materials and even recycle e-wastes are becoming more prominent in Utah. Just one of these initiatives reportedly diverted 60,000 pounds of waste from landfills in 2014, while another project at the University of Utah seeks to dramatically improve the economic incentive for recycling e-wastes. For solid waste, which received a B-, the number of landfills has also increased from 107 in 2013 to 122 today. Yet only 5% of the state's total usable landfill area has been used. These grades show that Utah has done commendable work keeping its infrastructure well maintained and prepared for the future, but there's still work left to be done. We need to continue educating the public on the status of our structures and to continue seeking revenue streams across all agencies, particularly since we still don't yet know the long-term impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. Utah's population is expected to reach a total of 5 million people by 2050, and it is up to our community leaders to ensure that our infrastructure is ready to efficiently serve those demands. If we are ready to improve upon what we've already accomplished, ASCE has some suggestions to start raising the grades. First, we must develop a statewide risk assessment framework that prioritizes and programs funding for levee flood control and canal projects. This could systematically address deficiencies, reduce risks, and eliminate potentially expensive flood insurance requirements for property owners. Second, improve frequency of dam rehabilitation from 60 years to 25 years. Third, extend the life cycle cost of drinking water, stormwater, and wastewater systems by establishing statewide guidelines for construction, operations, and maintenance. These guidelines should include seismic resiliency. Fourth, we must update the state's waste management practices with an emphasis on sustainable waste management, including circular economy initiatives, which reduce the overall volume of the waste stream. And lastly, the state must improve access to frequent, reliable transit and establish transit planning and land use policies that will increase access to historically underserved and multicultural communities. Now that we've had a chance to go through the report's findings, if you have any questions, please send them through the chat box. It may be, I think it's open now. So please send those questions through the chat box, and we will address them momentarily in a question and answer session after hearing from our next guest. We do ask that you include your name and organization along with your questions. Now I'd like to introduce Guna Gunalan, who served as the 2020 president of ASCE National. He's also the senior vice president over transportation alternative delivery at AECOM. Guna has nearly 30 years of practicing in Utah and is an advocate for infrastructure needs in our state, with a clear focus on our stellar transportation systems. Guna, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Greg. Appreciate the opportunity to be with you all. It's a privilege to join you as you release our state's infrastructure report card. I would like to commend you, your team, and our ASCE staff at the headquarters for the yeoman effort it takes to put together a report card like this. As you pointed out, the report card is a snapshot, and hopefully it'll serve our citizens and our leaders to identify categories that we will need additional attention in the coming years. As you all know, that we are in the process of getting ready to release our national report card, which will be released in the month of March in 2021. There are a number of reports that are being generated in the meantime that talks about, the failure to invest and so on. So please make yourselves familiar to not only know about the state of affairs within our great state, but also on the national level, so that we can communicate with our leaders, both here and the federal government, to make sure that we are continuing to make the investments needed in the infrastructure domain. I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our legislative leaders in our state for their vision, commitment, and willingness to make the investments to continue to maintain our infrastructure in good repair and use. Our citizens should be very proud, as Utah's grade, even though it may seem like a C+, it's one of the highest in the nation. And we have done a great job in continuing to make the investments needed. with the projected growth and changing demographics and aging infrastructure, we need to continue to not let our guards down, but continue to make the investments. Need to focus on the areas where we can, as Craig had pointed out, so that we can improve the grades in the coming year, and also to focus attention as enumerated by our Governor-elect Cox about the rural investments that needs to be made to make sure that no citizens in our state is left behind, so that they continue to enjoy the quality of life that we all have grown to enjoy here in this great state of Utah. Investment is good to not only to improve and to maintain the quality of life, but to attract business so that it's good for the economy, so that our citizens continue to stay here, grow the families, and find it very nice to enjoy the outdoors that we all get to enjoy, not necessarily at this time when it's cold, but those who love to ski and everything else, I'm sure they love this season as well. So I would like to thank you and the rest of the folks, and also challenge all of those participating today, the civil engineers, because it's our moral obligation to make sure that infrastructure is safe, resilient, and sustainable, and continues to serve our citizens in this great state. Thank you for all your efforts, and thank you for being here. And I hope this provides a backdrop for continued dialogue and investments in the coming years, so that we continue to attract and serve to be a place that people want to come and stay, work, and enjoy the great outdoors. Thank you.
Thank you again for your time, Guna. Your insights are greatly appreciated and help paint the picture for where our systems stand and what Utahns stand to gain through continued infrastructure investment. We would like to address the questions that have been provided through the chat. While I'll primarily be leading the discussion, we'll also reach out to individual members of our committee to address questions related to their expertise. So Darren Burton will help with that. We'll be able to read the questions, and I will divert and direct those questions.
Greg, we'll just start at the top. Brian Fryer with the Engineering News Record asks, why are levees in particularly poor condition and what can be done?
That's great. That's a great question. We have our author on that chapter, Ryan Ma, and I would like to turn time to him to answer that question. Ryan, you good?
Thanks, Craig. Can you hear me now?
Yep, I can hear you.
I think typically when we think of levees, we think of what we might see along the Mississippi River, one of these bigger river interchanges. What we don't think about often is here in Utah, we have significant terrain relief. Water that comes down from the mountains and deposits in our shallow lakes that are in the valleys. That water, as it transmits along, introduces and produces a flood hazard. And levees are essential in addressing and keeping that flood level within the banks. One of the changes that's very significant is the National Flood Insurance Program has changed the way that they're doing mapping. This means that historically homeowners who were not within a floodplain are now being mapped in a floodplain and looking at expensive alternatives to be able to maintain and keep insurance. These levees simply were not designed for the modern infrastructure that's encroaching upon them. Historically, a farmer would be able to push up some embankments next to a stream or a creek or a river, and that would serve adequately to protect during a flood event. But now with homes and businesses, utilities, other infrastructure that's near those levees, the consequence associated with failure is much more significant. What the state can do to fix this is to prioritize funding for levee and flood improvement projects, particularly those that are high risk and high impact to communities. Municipalities here locally have taken great efforts. Several have several counties have to make improvements. We recognize Cache, Weber, Iron, and Salt Lake counties for their efforts. The Surplus Canal project is a significant achievement, a milestone. There's still more to be done. And we believe that with our state legislature being proactive and progressive and supportive as they are for infrastructure, this can be addressed in the immediate future. Thanks, Craig.
Thank you, Ryan.
Thanks, Ryan. The next question, this is from Rick Aaron with ABC4 News. Could you please elaborate on the exact effect a large earthquake could have on Utah's drinking water distribution? Also, what is the solution to making our pipeline system more seismically sturdy?
Thank you for that question. So the exact effect is largely unknown, but the state has taken great lengths to build infrastructure to meet current design and seismic requirements. Our drinking water system is set up so that our drinking water comes from snowpack in the mountains, goes into reservoirs, and then is brought to the valleys and the cities through pipelines, and these pipelines cross the Wasatch Fault. Through this system asset management plans, plans are in place for repairing damages from earthquakes with materials being stockpiled and being able to make repairs quickly. But we'd like to also offer an opportunity for Ryan Ma again to make a comment on this, if that's all right. Ryan's done a lot of research into seismic risks in Utah, and he's done a lot of writing on that for our report card. So Ryan, do you have anything to add to that?
I guess you're looking for Ryan to answer, right?
Yeah, I think he's on mute still.
Thanks, Craig. I think that's a great question. We're fortunate in Utah that we live in an environment where we've got the mountain terrain where water's deposited in snowpack and evaporates and melts over time and comes down. I think that's great. But one of the challenges that we have is that the water is on the east side of our state or in the mountains, and our population centers are in the valleys. And the nature of the fault zone, the Wasatch Fault Zone here, is such that the mountains are going to stay where they're at and the valleys are going to drop. In fact, historical estimations of earthquake events estimate displacements on the order of 15 feet. That's a significant change for a pipeline to be able to bridge going from the mountains to the valleys. There are a number of innovative technologies and some great work that's being done by water districts, by conservancy districts and others that Craig has highlighted. There are alternatives in place, but perhaps more important is the planning and the hardening of these assets to make sure that when an event does happen, that we're prepared and we have the resources to deal with it. Looking at solutions, I think our seismic environment's a little bit different than in California. California, the faults are moving in different ways. Ours are moving, one side is going down, the other side's staying where it's at. California moves differently, but there are some innovative stuff that is being applied here in terms of technologies to help address that, and or if we can't bridge that gap, to come in and replace the pipelines quickly or provide an alternative means for water to get where it needs to go. So there are some great things that are in progress, and we look forward to them being developed as the state moves towards better resiliency of their pipelines and infrastructure. Our water districts and conservancy districts should be applauded for all their efforts.
Thanks, Ryan. The next question from Brian Fryer, again with ENR. Where does technology infrastructure fit here? And additionally, I didn't see anything about the electrical grid. Where do those fit regarding this report? Craig?
Thank you. Yeah, technology infrastructure is a big part plays a big part in the quality of life within our state, and it does have implementation in each of these categories. In our report card, the full report card, which will be released in early January, there are more information on how technology applies to each of these categories that we've discussed today. Also, our state report cards are conducted by volunteers and ASCE staff, and the categories in the report card are dependent on the availability of volunteers to research, review, and assess each category. So to create this report card, the community compiled and assessed technical reports for infrastructure categories that we had the capacity to assess. And then we graded those categories that we have presented here today on those 8 key criteria, which were reported, which I went over earlier. So, and our report card committee also works to keep categories consistent with other state report cards and the National Infrastructure Report Card.
Thanks, Craig. The next question is from Eleanor Lamb with Transportation Topics. She asks, what role does Utah's road and bridge network play in the movement of cross-country truck freight? What impact do these vehicles have on infrastructure?
Yeah, you may have heard that Utah is considered the crossroads of the West. We have several interstates that come through our state, and so we play a big role in moving freight and goods across the country. So we do have our state's transportation system plays a role not only in our economic viability, but for the rest of the country. So the state places a strong focus on being able to allow all sorts of traffic, so truck traffic, and then car traffic that we see each day on the interstate to get through our state. The state takes a close look at how that infrastructure impacts our roads and plans accordingly. I think our grade, which is a B+ for roads and bridges, demonstrates the commitment from our state leaders on providing a quality transportation system. I believe the B+ in both of those are two of the highest grades in the nation. So we applaud Utah for their efforts on that.
Thanks, Craig. Rick Aaron asks, could one of your experts comment on how most average citizens take infrastructure for granted and don't notice it until there is a problem?
Sure. I'll answer this first, and I'll actually give Ryan an opportunity to respond if he wants to on this. So one thing I don't think the average citizen understands is that nationally, each American family loses $3,400 a year in disposable income because of our inadequate and outdated infrastructure. So part of our goal for this report card is to bring awareness to not only our state leaders, our legislative leaders, but also to the general public on the importance of infrastructure and how that affects their everyday life. And with that, there is an actual quantitative amount of what an average American sees. So infrastructure should be a priority during state and local budget discussions and elections. Is there anything you'd like to add to that, Ryan?
Thanks, Craig. I think that pretty well covers it. I think the important thing is to be mindful of the role that infrastructure plays in our daily life. It's very easy for us to take it for granted. When things are working smoothly and going well, it's easy to forget about it. But really, we have to be looking at the long-term investment, the long-term picture of how infrastructure plays into the economic and success of our communities.
Thanks, Craig. Thanks, Ryan. Ross Terrell from KUER asks, is there any concern that the state's overall grade remained unchanged from 2015 to now? Is that common, or should elected officials take this more seriously?
That's a good question. So as we mentioned, this grade is based on 12 different categories that we evaluated. As we've gone through that, a lot of the grades stayed the same, which I think is not necessarily a concern for some of those because it does demonstrate that Utah is placing a priority on this infrastructure. Some of our grades did decrease a little bit, not many, but that should be bring up and start a discussion on how we can improve that infrastructure and how we can improve the quality of life for our residents here in the state. As a comment, we've talked about this, Utah does have one of the highest grades in the nation. So that is something we should be proud of. But there is still work to do. So I think overall, the grade unchanging is not necessarily something to be concerned about. What we do recommend is that as the detailed report with all the detailed information is released in early January, that we have that discussion on each individual chapter of that report card and each of these infrastructure types, and have the discussion there and find ways that we can move forward and raise the grades. At the end of my presentation, I did identify 5 opportunities where we could raise the grade, things we can do as a state. So I think that is where we need to start focusing. We'll also have in each chapter in the report card, the detailed report that will come out in early January, there are recommendations for raising the grade for each individual infrastructure type. So more information will be coming on that, and we'll be able to have discussions on how we can continue to improve and make Utah even better.
Excellent. Thank you, Craig. Appreciate that. Heather Christensen asks, what roles do materials play in regard to piping, infrastructure, stormwater, wastewater, drinking water, damage due to an earthquake? Are some pipe materials more resilient to earthquake loads than others?
It's a good question. Yes, there are materials do play an important role, and we strive to follow seismic design standards in all of the categories of our infrastructure. There has been advancement in research and requirements and materials as well. And so as engineers move forward on projects, we evaluate the availability of these materials and evaluate them for each project to determine which material type is best for the type of project. Like I said, some materials are more resilient to earthquakes, and those type of materials are used. I think, I'm not sure if our stormwater author is here, but I think when it comes also to earthquake loads, I'm gonna, again, Ryan knows a lot about the seismic requirements, so sorry I keep going to Ryan, but I'm gonna let Ryan make some comments on earthquakes and how our materials respond to different seismic requirements.
That's a great question. I think there's actually 2 there. So do the materials make a difference in how they're going to behave during an earthquake? Absolutely. So when we look at materials like concrete, we might have a high compressive strength, but lower in tension. And so how that pipeline bridges that fault is a critical consideration. As part of that as well is how the joints come together. There are joints that allow for additional movement without leaking. There are joints that allow for reattachment a little bit easier. There are ways to bypass pipelines with joints that are faster and easier if a line does break. So there is a lot of consideration that goes into that. Looking at the different pipe materials, there are pros and cons to each one. One may be more resistant to movement. One may be more flexible if movement happens, and one may be easier to repair when it does happen. So I think what we have to keep in mind is that we're learning from these earthquake events, finding new ways, innovations to be able to address this hazard. So hopefully that answers the question. It's not a one-size-fits-all solution, but that's why we're in the business we're in, is to find innovative solutions to complicated problems and to learn from natural disasters as they occur to keep them from impacting us as severely in the future.
Thank you, Ryan.
Craig, that's the end of the questions. If anybody has, we can wait a few seconds here, but if anybody has a last question that they'd like to submit, please enter it now. Otherwise, that kind of brings us to the end of the questions, Craig.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't see any more questions coming through. I think that'll be the end of the questions. Thank you, Craig.
So I guess this is a continuous conversation, right, for the next little while. So it doesn't stop here. So feel free to reach out to any of us. That we'll be more than glad to address any of your questions and concerns. And this is an ongoing conversation with all of you and with the leadership to make sure that we continue to invest, make the improvements necessary so that our citizens enjoy a quality infrastructure and they continue to stay here and enjoy this great state.
Thank you, Grina. I'd like to close by saying that the future of our state relies on our ability to sustain and improve the current conditions of our infrastructure sectors, in addition to improving those that are lagging behind. Our infrastructure drives economic growth, creates jobs, and protects us from extreme events. Clearly, Utah has a great appeal for our state's great beauty and also functional leadership, as seen with our booming population and ever-increasing business opportunities. The infrastructure that connects us must be prepared to support existing residents, newcomers, and tourists alike. We work hard to build and maintain our systems for the public's health, safety, and welfare, and we ask that our policymakers review the 2020 report card for Utah's infrastructure when making infrastructure policy that affects our citizens. I'd like to once again thank our committee who diligently completed the report card this year. We'd also like to thank Guna for sharing his insights today, and thank all of you for joining us for the release of these preliminary findings from the 2020 report card for Utah's infrastructure. Please keep an eye out for the full report, which will be released in early January. The full report will provide even greater context to the grades we've discussed today, with individual recommendations for each infrastructure category. You'll be able to find the full report at infrastructurereportcard.org/Utah. And if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to email us at reportcard@asce.org. Again, the email address is reportcard@asce.org. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Guna. Thank you, Ryan, and all of the report card committee. This will be the end of our press conference today. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a safe day and safe travels. Thank you.
Thank you.